Hello students, welcome to the second class. We're going to be talking about introduction to biological concepts and some research. Let's go ahead and get started. So what is life? What classifies life? First of all, there's a few different characteristics of living things that is basis for life. So first, it has to be cellular. It has to have a cellular component. That means that it has to have that phospholipid bilayer. It has to have some type of layer on the outside that contains some components within. Heredity of traits. This means that it has to have some type of genetic origin. It has to have some type of genes within it, right? So usually what we know as genes is DNA, right? There's also RNA. Those are the basic two that that contains traits, right? Genes, genetics, traits in general, nucleic acids. Metabolism of energy. These include trophic organisms, right? So trophy, some type of gaining of energy, right? So photosynthesis, cellular respiration, those are the two types of eating or gaining of energy. Response to the environment. So this includes anything touching the organism that responds back to the environment, or this is a physical response, right? So this is different from homeostasis, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Reproduction of offspring. This also goes back to hereditary, or heredity of traits. Reproduction, so, you know, you have to have one gamete and another gamete, right? Usually it's a male and a female. Sometimes it can be a little bit different. In higher organisms, it's male and female. In lower organisms, it's just kind of a binary system. Some type of difference in one and the other. Growth and development. So anything growing and developing, so through mitosis. You have any type of multicellular organism is going to have some type of growth. Anything splitting from one cell to the next cell, to the next cell, to the next cell, to the next cell. That's growth and development. Unicellular organisms don't really grow, right? They're still classified as life, but they don't really grow, they don't really develop, right? But they are still classified as life because they're cellular, they're hereditary, you know, they metabolize and such. Homeostasis of conditions. So this is different from response to the environment, in which homeostasis involves things like if you get hot, you sweat, or if you get cold, you shiver, right? This is internal, rather than in response to the environment is more external, right? So external meaning that if you physically get poked, you respond to that. Homeostasis is more internal, where your internal organs start to respond to the external environment. This is more chemically based, rather than response to the environment is more physically based. Hierarchy of life. So life in general has to go through some type of hierarchy, right? So the lowest, smallest unit of life, because we are classifying life as having cells, the smallest unit of life is a cell, because it can live and reproduce individually, independently. And a group of cells, if they are individually, independently reproducing, a group of cells together is called a tissue. So cells together, bound together in some type of system, is called a tissue. Now, a tissue together, group of tissues together, is called a tissue system, right? Specialized cells working together, specialized tissues working together is called a tissue system, right? Different types of tissues working together is called a tissue system. Tissue systems working together are called organs. The next level up, we have organ systems, right? Let's say that if we call ourselves the different organs here, we have the mouth, esophagus, stomach, duodenum or whatever, liver. Those are different organs, right? But we have a different organ system, right? That organ system is called the digestive system. And then the next layer up is called the organism, that would be the human. So this whole hierarchy here, cell, tissue, tissue system, organ system, organism, anything below organism is called organismal biology. If you study that whole system, that whole hierarchy, that's called organismal biology, right? If you're not a doctor or anything that studies medicine in that system. If you study within those hierarchy, you are in organismal biology. Now, if you go into anything higher than that, anything higher than the organism is called ecological biology. Because what you're doing is you're studying the energy going from one individual to the next individual. Now, what I mean by energy is I mean energy and matter, right? Energy meaning, food, resources, anything from electrons, minerals, anything like that, right? That's energy in a nutshell. A group of organisms or a group of individuals that share the same components, that means within species, is called a population. A population must exist within the same time and within the same place. Let me say that again. It's within the same time, within the same place, right? And this is specified by the biologists. It can mean that the population is strictly prohibited by a wall that prohibits species from interacting, either through reproductive means, through geological means, any type of means whatsoever. That the population is bound by a specific barrier. That is an area within a specific time. And I also mean a specific time because that time also exists when that population is still alive within that area. Think about a group of cranes within an area. If that crane population decides to migrate, that population is not within that area at that time. That means that group is not contributing to the energy within that area at that time. And that also implies that that community is not receiving the energy. Now, what is a community? A community consists of all the populations within the area, within the time. Now, they're not talking about one species now, right? We're talking about different species now. So, if we go back to the crane example, cranes eat frogs, which eat bugs, which eat plant life, right? So if the cranes decide to migrate, the cranes are no longer eating the frogs, which the frogs can repopulate. If the frogs are repopulating, the insect population will go down. If the insect population goes down, the plant population will go back up. That's the energy, material cycles that are going on in this ecological system. So it's all about timing, it's all about area, it's all about how these systems flow within this context. So if the crane population decides to come back within its migratory system, what do you think would happen? So that's your attendance assignment. What do you think would happen if this crane population would come back into this migratory system? What would happen to the frogs? What would happen to the bugs? What would happen to the plant life? Okay. Ecosystems are all the interactions of the living and non-living components. Now, what do I mean by non-living components? Non-living components consist of minerals, water, dirt, anything that's within the system that doesn't have any cellular components or any of those other things that I said was living. But the non-living components interact with the living components, right? So let's say that a worm is digesting some type of mineral, right? It's digesting some gold, it's digesting some aluminum, it's digesting some other stuff. And let's say that humans have dumped a lot of aluminum into the soil. What's eating the worms? Well, some birds are eating the worms, right? Birds are getting a lot of aluminum poisoning, right? Well, if the birds are getting a lot of aluminum poisoning, what's eating the birds? There's some predators out there that are eating the birds, right? See how this is raising up into the predators. Poisoning the predators are getting poisoned, right? If the predators are getting poisoned, what's there to control the deer population? So, if the deer population goes out of control, the plant population will suffer as a problem. There's a lot of different problems that go along with this ecological system. Okay, ecosystems. Higher up from that, we have what's called a biome. Biome is a community of plants and animals that have common characteristics. for the environment in which they exist in, right? So, ecosystems, biomes, right? So biomes are like deserts, biomes are like tundras, biomes are like coastal lands, right? But you can define a biome very, very specifically due to its plant habitats, due to its animal habitats, right? And due to its minerals, due to its waters, due to all the different stuff that's going on. So I can say that this is a tundra, but this is a desert tundra because there's not a whole lot of plants in there, right? Or there's not a whole lot of rainfall. It's much larger than an ecosystem. Up from biomes is a biosphere. Now, this is one of the largest, basically consisting of all components of living, non-living, also anything below the earth and above the earth. Volcanic, atmospheric, anything within the earth, right? Anything within the ocean. Okay? Anything consisting of weather climates, or weather and climate, anything consisting of weather and climate, hurricanes, tornadoes, those things that can cause a lot of what's called genetic drift, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Biosphere is the largest in ecological standpoint. Not a whole lot of people study this because it is difficult to study long term. We ourselves are mortal beings. We ourselves are mortal beings, so it takes a long time to study biosphere phenomena. So we're going to go back down to heritable elements, right? In life, the most heritable element is DNA. All life consists of DNA to give to its offspring to go through meiosis, go through its gametes to give DNA to its offspring. So it's a large double-stranded helical molecule, contains instructions for assembling proteins and simpler molecules to help the cell do what it needs to do. Carrier of genetic information, the central dogma of genetic biology. Basically, what you're going to be doing, right, is you're going to be taking DNA, putting it into RNA, and then putting it into a polypeptide, or what's called a protein. Okay, we'll be going through this process a lot more in depth in a later chapter. Okay, so all of the DNA inside a living organism's cells is called its genome. So if you took one of your cells and took all of its DNA out, first of all, it would be a lot longer than that. But if you took all of its DNA out, that would be called its genome. A specific region of the genome is called a gene, and that encodes a protein. So one gene, one protein. The process in which DNA goes into RNA is called transcription. So it transcribes DNA into RNA. Transcribing means to write. So if I'm transcribing something to you, it means that I'm writing something down on a piece of paper. I'm just writing it down. Translation is the process in which RNA goes to proteins, right? If I'm translating something to you, it means that I'm telling you something. I'm translating something from, let's say, English into Portuguese. So if I'm transcribing something to you, I'm writing it down. Let's say that DNA into RNA, it's not that different, right? So if you transcribe something, I'm saying that I'm writing something from one piece of paper to another piece of paper, right? DNA is not that different from RNA, right? So if I'm just transcribing, I'm just writing something from one piece of paper to another piece of paper. But if I'm translating something, I'm basically putting something from one piece of paper to a whole nother thing. So I'm basically doing this. I'm getting a piece of paper and I'm having to speak it. I'm having to put it out into words. I'm having to translate it. That's how this process goes. I'm having to put this into a protein. I'm having to put this into a different context. That's a central dogma of genetic biology. Okay, next we're going to be talking about energy, metabolism. So where does most of the energy, or if not all the energy, come from on Earth? It comes from the sun, right? So sun beats down on the Earth with all of its radiation, and you're probably telling me, well, there's a lot of things down in the ocean, right, that doesn't get the sun's energy. Well, where do you think that most of the gravity from the Earth came from? The sun, right? The Earth had to form from something, right? So the sun formed the Earth. The sun came from a ball of mass, and then eventually the Earth formed from that. So metabolism is the ability of a cell or organism to extract energy from its surroundings, from the atmosphere, from something, in order to maintain itself, grow, and reproduce. Right? So how do you get your energy? Well, you have to eat, you have to take some type of vitamins, maybe, you have to get water, right? That's your metabolism, and it goes through your system, it goes through your digestive system, right? May go through your cells at some point. That's your metabolism, right? But we go through cellular respiration. Let's say a plant can go through photosynthesis, right? Plants also go through cellular respiration. Fungi can go through cellular respiration as well. Cyanobacteria can go through photosynthesis. There's a lot of these different things can go through these different processes. So photosynthesis can gather photoelectromagnetic light, right? Sunlight is absorbed, converted that into chemical energy through different membranes. We'll be going through photosynthesis in a lot of detail a little bit later. So what organelle does photosynthesis use in order to go through its processes? It'd be the chlorophyll or chloroplast. And then the chlorophyll is the molecule that it uses. There's other things like chromoplasts, xanthophyll, other things like that it can use as well. And then there's cellular respiration, right? That breaks down biological molecules with oxygen, releases chemical energy that we can use in order to keep our functions going. So we use mitochondria. We can use mitochondria to flex our muscles, to keep our heart going, to keep our lungs going, to keep our mouths going, right? Anytime we move, that's what our mitochondria can use to keep our muscles moving. There's different types of metabolic ways that animals can get their energy. So animals and plants. Photosynthetic organisms, these are what's called primary producers, or just producers. They produce energy, right? They produce energy from the sun, on which other organisms rely. So energy comes from the sun. They assemble complex molecules from water and CO2 and sunlight. These complex molecules are sugar, mostly triose, and that triose will form into glucose. And that glucose will turn into other disaccharides and polysaccharides. Once those turn into sugars, animals will come through and eat those up, right? Animals will come and eat those, and they're called consumers, right? The first ones are called primary consumers. Those are herbivores, right? And you see here, one's a zebra. And they feed directly or indirectly on complex molecules manufactured by plants. So primary consumers are directly from plants, right? So primary consumers will feed directly on plants. Now, they have to eat a lot of plants, right? They'll eat leaves, they'll eat bulbs, they'll eat flowers, other things like that. But keep in mind that the plants don't want to give up their sugars quite easily, right? If you eat a leaf, how much sugar are you going to get from that leaf? Not a whole lot, right? If you're just grazing out in the field, eating grass and other things like that, you're not going to get a whole lot of sugar from that. You're not going to get a whole lot of carbohydrates from that. So what you're going to do is you're going to eat a lot. And you're going to have stomachs, a lot of different stomachs to ferment that. Right? You're going to try and get as much sugar from that as possible. You're going to try and get as much nutrients from that as possible, right? Because you don't have the capability of cooking it, you don't have the capability of doing all that other stuff, right? So you're going to minimize what's the amount of heat coming out of that. You're going to try and maximize the amount of energy coming out of that as well, right? The problem being for primary consumers, at least ecologically, is that they'll eat a lot of plants and then they'll have a lot of offspring. So these can be actually detrimental to the environment when it comes to plants. So if you have a large population of deer, let's say, but not a whole lot of population of secondary consumers, let's say wolves. So secondary consumers are, those that eat meat. Secondary consumers are any animal that has an affinity for primary consumers. Wolves, for example. If you don't have a whole lot of secondary consumers, you're going to have more primary consumers. If you have more primary consumers, you're not going to have a whole lot of primary producers. See this balance in between that, right? So, let's say that you have a whole lot of primary consumers because you don't have a whole lot of primary or secondary consumers. You're not going to have a whole lot of primary producers. So, you're going to wipe out the land of plants, and then you're going to have this huge influx of deer. That's exactly what happened in Yosemite Park. And there was a lot of plant species that went extinct. Other metabolic types are decomposers. They feed on dead organisms, break them down into biological molecules so that they can be extracted by other things. All of these nutrients can be recycled into any part of itself, depending on what is feeding on what. Okay? But heat is always lost when it's transferred from one to the other. There's always the aspect of trying to minimize the amount of heat, but it's always lost each time that energy is transformed. Okay? So when a primary producer is eaten by a primary consumer, it's going to be lost. When a primary consumer is eaten by a secondary consumer, that heat is going to be lost. Next, we're going to talk about homeostasis. This is pretty easy. Basically maintenance of a steady internal condition. So if you have some type of response that occurs, let's say that you have some type of imbalance that occurs, let's say that you're going outside, it's cold outside. Some type of sensor says that it's cold. Input, information sent along a pathway, you go to your control center, that's your brain. Right? Output, information sent along the pathway, you start to walk back inside. Effector, the response to the effector, you get a coat. Variable in homeostasis, that imbalance starts to come back. You start to get warm. That imbalance occurs and then comes back to normal. What this is called is a negative feedback loop. It's negative because it comes back and it's a feedback. So homeostasis in temperature, blood chemistry, other important factors, right? This is all internal. This is your internal body chemistry, some type of effector in your body that's responding to either outside environments or inside environments, depending on what's happening. Reproduction and development. Okay, so reproduction is the process in which parents pass on the DNA, right, and produce offspring that resembles them. So this is the process by which you give babies, right? Transmission of DNA, this is called inheritance. So multicellular organisms undergo development. This is changed from either an egg, right, goes through different cycles and goes into an adult. Sometimes this goes through a sequential stage, right? This can go through what's called a life cycle. Insects, you can see this in insects. So this one is an atlas moth. And you can see the different stages. You have an egg, you have the instar caterpillar, the pupa, and then the adult. The adults of these can get quite large. They can get about that big, depending on what it is. But the DNA will encode each stage depending on what it eats, what the environment is, and how old it's going to get. I'm going to stop here, and we'll pick up this on Monday, right? So make sure to go through that attendance assignment, okay? And then we will go on from there. All right? Thank you.